Hello, and thank you so much for being here. I'm Jen Anderson, and I help women stop abandoning themselves, rebuild self trust, and begin making choices that reflect who they truly are instead of who they learned they had to be. A lot of my women are successful entrepreneurs, successful business people, high achieving moms and women that just find this one area that keeps them stuck. And so this is really where all this comes from. So if you've ever said yes when you desperately wanted to say no, if you've ever agreed to something and immediately felt frustrated, overwhelmed, or resentful, and if you've ever spent so much time taking care of everyone else that you're no longer quite sure what you need, this conversation is for you. I want to tell you right from the beginning that this is not going to be another conversation where I simply tell you that you need better boundaries. Boundaries absolutely matter, but I believe that there's something deeper happening underneath of them because most women already know they need boundaries or they need to hold true to their boundaries. They know they're allowed to say no. They know they deserve rest. They know they shouldn't have to earn their value by being useful, agreeable, or endlessly available. Knowing those things and actually living them are two very different experiences. So today we're going underneath the behavior. We're going to look at the hidden stories that influence your choices before you even realize a choice is being made. By the end of our time together, my hope is that you have an understanding of three things. First, why saying no can feel so much harder than it seems like it should. Second, how to begin recognizing the story that may quietly be making the decisions for you. And third, how to interrupt that story so you get to start making the choices that strengthen your self trust instead of continuing the pattern of abandoning yourself. But I don't simply want you to sit back and listen to me talk. That would be boring. I want this to feel more like a guided coaching conversation. Throughout our time together, I'm going to ask you questions. There are no right or wrong answers. You don't have to say anything out loud. You don't even need to write anything unless you want to. I simply want you to answer honestly to yourself. Not with answers that sound the healthiest or the best or what you think you should give, but the answer that's actually honest and true for you. Because I have a feeling that by the end of this conversation, you won't just understand the topic better, you will understand yourself a little bit better too. So are you ready? Let's dive in. I want you to think about the last time you said yes when every part of you wanted to say no. Don't overthink it. Just let the first situation come to mind. Maybe someone asked you to help them with something. Maybe it was another project at work, another volunteer commitment, another family gathering you really didn't have the energy for. Maybe someone called because they needed advice, support, or reassurance. Maybe someone simply asked, "Can you do this for me? Do you have the time?" Now I want you to think about what happened before you answered. Not what you said, but what happened inside of you. Did your stomach tighten? Did your shoulders tense? Did you feel that little knot in your chest? Did your mind immediately begin rearranging your schedule, searching for a way to make it work, even though you already knew that you didn't want to do it? But there was that quiet obligation going on. And maybe there was even a voice inside of you that whispered, I really don't want to do this. And then almost automatically you smiled and said, sure, I can do that. I want you to sit with that for just a minute. Here's what fascinates me. We already know. Before the word yes ever leaves our mouth, we know. Our bodies know, our intuition knows, our heart knows. Some part of us has already given us the answer no that we need to say, but we say yes anyway. Most of us believe the answer is simple. I just need better boundaries. And while boundaries absolutely matter, I don't think that's the whole story. I want to challenge that idea for a moment. Because after years of working with women, I noticed the women who struggle with boundaries are rarely unaware. They're very thoughtful, they're intelligent, they're caring. They've read the books, they've listened to the podcast. They know boundaries are important. They know they deserve rest. They know their needs matter. They know they don't have to earn their worth. And yet, when the moment comes, they still say yes. So I started asking different questions. I stopped asking why we can't say no. And I started asking, what's that story that's running through your mind right before you try to say no? Because I don't believe our choices happen in isolation. Our choices grow out of our beliefs, and our beliefs begin as stories. Stories we were told, stories we watched other people live, stories we created to make sense of what happened to us. Stories we repeated so many times that they stopped sounding like stories and started feeling like truth. Maybe your story sounds something like this. If I disappoint people, they're going to leave me. If I'm needed, I'm valuable. Good girl puts everyone else first. A good girl doesn't make life harder for people. If I say no, I'm selfish. It's my job to keep everyone happy. I'm the peacekeeper. If I don't hold everything together, things will fall apart. I'll just do it because it's easier. If I don't take care of it, nothing will get done. These don't always sound like stories. They sound like facts. They sound like reality. They aren't facts. They are our interpretations. They are conclusions your mind reached based on things you experienced, witnessed, or were taught. And here's why that matters. Imagine two women are asked the exact same question. Can you help me? One woman pauses and says, I'd love to, but I'm not able to right now. The other woman says yes, even though she's already exhausted, overwhelmed, and quietly resentful before the conversation has even ended. What's the difference between these two women? It's not kindness. It's not intelligence. It's not strength. May not even be confidence. The difference is the story running underneath the decision. One woman may believe, I can care about someone and still be honest about my capacity. I'm allowed to say no because I'm overwhelmed already and I can't take on one more thing. The other woman may believe, if I disappoint this person, it means I'm selfish, unkind, or no longer valuable to them. The request is the same. The meaning attached to the request is completely different. It wasn't asked in a different way. It's not like the second woman pressure was put on her. It was asked the same way. That's why this conversation is not really about teaching you how to say no. It's about discovering the story that has been quietly saying yes for you in the background. It does it for you on autopilot. I'd like you to return to the situation you thought about at the beginning. Now finish this sentence honestly. If I had said no, I was afraid this would happen, blank, whatever that is. What were you afraid of would happen? Don't give yourself the answer that sounds reasonable or emotionally healthy. Notice the first honest answer that appears. Maybe they would have been disappointed. Maybe they would have been angry. Maybe they would have thought they were selfish, stopped talking to you or asking you for help. Maybe they would have thought you had changed. Maybe they would have questioned whether you cared about them. Maybe you were afraid of feeling guilty. Maybe you were afraid that if you didn't handle it, nobody else would. Maybe something completely different came up for you. Whatever it was, don't judge it, don't criticize it. Just notice it. This is where we get to be curious, right? Why did that come up? Because that answer may be your first clue about the story that's been quietly shaping your choices for years. Now I want to introduce you to a phrase I use often in my work. And that phrase is called self-abandonment. Sometimes when people hear the word self-abandonment, they assume I'm talking about someone who doesn't love herself. And that isn't what I mean at all. Self-abandonment happens in the moments where you override what you already know is true. Your body says, I'm exhausted, but you push through anyway. Your heart says, I don't want to do this, but you agree anyway. Your intuition says something doesn't feel right, but you convince yourself that you're being dramatic or overreacting. You need support, but you tell yourself you should be able to handle it alone. You're hurt, but you say, it's fine. You already had information. You already had an answer. You simply didn't trust yourself enough to honor it. Sometimes, because we've done the story underneath for so long, that it's easier to not listen to all that information. It's easier to not dig deep and say, why am I not doing these things? What's really going on? If my intuition is kicking in and saying something's wrong, it might take me a while to figure out what that something really is. Because I have to evaluate and go through this process of what is it that I'm feeling? When did I start feeling this? What is it that's popping up? Where am I noticing it in my body? Because that gives me different signals. It's a process. It's time consuming. It's tough because sometimes I don't want to hear the answer. I don't want to go through that. Self-abandonment sometimes can be easier. The problem is that the cost ends up being huge for you over time because you stop trusting yourself and now everything else shifts. And all of a sudden, you don't even know who you are anymore and what you want. You don't just wake up one morning and decide, you know what? I think I'll spend the rest of my life abandoning myself. We learn this. This is why we do it. But at some point, we have to do the opposite and start choosing ourselves. We have to allow ourselves to feel safer. We have to allow ourselves peace. We have to allow ourselves to belong and be comfortable in our own skin. We have to get curious and we have to know what's going on. Instead of asking what's wrong with me, you could ask what story taught me that saying yes was safer than telling the truth. I know that question changed the way I understood my own choices. Because once you can identify the story, you can begin deciding whether it's still the story you want to live by. 'Cause you absolutely can if you want to do that. But for me, that realization came through one of the hardest and most important experiences of my life. It came through someone I love very deeply, and that's my brother, my older. My brother struggled with addiction for most of his life. He is no longer with us. Sometimes I speak about him in the present, and sometimes I speak about him in past tense, because as far as I'm concerned, he still lives with me and he's still here. But I also know that he's in a better place. And so you will hear me change tenses. This is just how I refer to him. And if you've ever loved someone who was struggling, you know it's incredibly complicated. You love them, you want to help, you want to believe that maybe this time, this conversation, this promise, this treatment, this opportunity will finally be the one that changes everything. And when you love someone, especially someone in your family, helping them feels like the right thing to do. In fact, it feels like the only thing to do sometimes. So that's what I did. I answered the phone. I worried, tried to fix things. I carried burdens that were never really mine to carry. And honestly, especially in the beginning, I didn't think twice about it. I wasn't trying to abandon myself. I wasn't trying to ignore my own needs. I genuinely believed I was doing what a good sister should do. Of course, looking back now, I can see something I couldn't see then. There was a story running my life, and it wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, it simply sounded true. The story said, if I love enough, if I help enough, if I sacrifice enough, maybe I can save him. Maybe this will be the thing that will get him to understand. I didn't know that was a story. I thought it was love. And if I get a little emotional during this, at the time I'm recording it, tomorrow is actually his birthday. So, ironically, recording this is a very interesting time for me, but it's therapeutic. It's good to talk about it. And so, if I get a little emotional, that's really what's going on. So, I didn't know that this was a story. I thought it was love. And there's a big difference because love says, I'll walk beside you. My story said, I am responsible for the outcome. Those are two very different things. I spent a lot of time, effort, and energy exhausting myself because I couldn't see the difference. Maybe you've done something similar. Maybe not with addiction like this, but maybe with your adult children, maybe with your spouse, maybe with your aging parents. I'm going through a little of that as well. I also have a husband who has chronic kidney disease, so I'm a caregiver all over the place. Maybe with friendships, maybe with work, clients. Maybe you do it with everyone. Maybe you take on everyone's struggles because you think you can help. They might be different people, but it's the same pattern. Somewhere along the way, you started believing that carrying everyone else somehow proved your love. It's tough to hear, isn't it? I know it was tough for me to realize, but I want to ask you something. Who are you carrying right now? Not physically, but emotionally, mentally. Whose choices are taking up space in your mind every single day? Whose happiness feels like your responsibility? Whose disappointment are you constantly trying to avoid? Just notice who came to mind, because that answer matters. There wasn't one dramatic day when everything suddenly became clear. It happened much more quietly than that. One day, I realized something that stopped me in my tracks. I had become so focused on saving someone else that I had stopped paying attention to what it was costing me. I was emotionally exhausted, constantly worried, always waiting for the next phone call, always wondering what would happen next. And here's the part that's hardest for me to admit. The more I abandoned myself, the less it actually helped. You hear that? I want you to hear that again. The more I abandoned myself, the less I actually changed anything for him. That realization was heartbreaking because it meant I had built my life around a story that wasn't producing the outcome I thought it was. And for the first time, I asked myself a different question. I didn't ask myself, how do I love him better? I asked, can I love him without leaving myself behind? What do I need out of all of this? How do I take care of me and still take care of him and love him? How do I make him responsible for him and me responsible for me? All the same question, it's just a little differently worded. But that changed everything because the answer was, yes, I could love him and love myself at the same time. I could love him. I could pray for him. I could support him where it worked for me. I could have good thoughts for him. I could hope for him. I could celebrate every step forward. But I could no longer believe that sacrificing myself was the price of loving him. That wasn't love. That was the story I'd been living from. Now, before we go any further, I want to tell you something that I hope feels like a deep breath. Please don't be angry with yourself for believing your story. Seriously. Because chances are that story helped you survive something. Maybe it helped you stay connected into your family. Maybe it helped you avoid conflict when you didn't have the capacity for conflict. Maybe it helped you earn an approval, which taught you some discipline. There's always a lesson in there. Maybe it helped you feel safe. Maybe it helped you make sense of a situation that was incredibly painful. Your story isn't evidence that something's wrong with you. It's evidence that your mind was trying to protect you. And I think that's beautiful because your brain did exactly what it was designed to do. It looked at your experiences and it created meaning. The problem isn't that it created a story. The problem is that many of us never stopped asking whether that story is still true. Think back to the sentence you completed earlier. If I say no, what? I want you to ask yourself one more question. Where did I learn that? Not who taught it. Where did I learn it? It could be who taught it. It could be that somebody said to you, if you aren't a good girl, if you don't help, you're going to be bad and people are going to think you're selfish. It could be who taught it to you. That would be like if a parent said that, then your parent taught it to you. You learned it from your parent, something your parent said, something maybe even they modeled. Maybe your mom always said yes because she didn't want people to stop talking to her or to think she was selfish. Could have been a relationship. It could have been religion, a classroom, your family, a painful experience. The list could go on for days, but just notice it. Because awareness isn't about blaming. It's about understanding, and understanding gives us choices. Here's what I wish I had known years ago. Just because a story explains your past doesn't mean it has to direct your future. You are allowed to question it, examine it. You are allowed to ask, is this still true? For years, my story sounded like this. If I love him enough, I can save him. Today, my story sounds different when it comes to people and relationships. I can love someone deeply without abandoning myself. I get to love someone and let them save themselves. Do you hear the difference? My love didn't change. The story changed. Maybe your story has been a good girl never disappoints anyone. What if your new story is a healthy girl, a healthy woman tells the truth with kindness? Maybe your story has been my value comes from being needed. But what if your new story became my value has never depended on how much I do for everyone else? We don't rewrite a story in an afternoon. We rewrite it one choice at a time, one conversation at a time, one pause at a time. And that's exactly where I want to go next. Because once I understood the story, I needed a way to stop living from it. And I discovered 3 simple questions that have changed hundreds of my decisions in my own life. They're simple, but they're incredibly powerful, and I'd love to share them with you. So, what do you do once you recognize the story? Because awareness is powerful, it's always the first step. But awareness alone doesn't create change. If you've ever caught yourself thinking, I know why I do this, or I know that I do this, but I can't stop, I still keep doing it, you're absolutely not alone. We all do it. Knowing the story is just the beginning. Learning to choose differently is what changes your life. Over the years, I've discovered 3 questions that have completely changed the way I make decisions. They're simple. In fact, they may feel too simple. But I've learned that the simplest questions are often the most powerful. Now, before I answer a request, before I commit to something, before I volunteer, before I automatically say yes, I pause. Not because I'm trying to make the perfect decision, because I'm trying to make an intentional one. And I ask myself 3 questions. What story's running through my mind right now? I don't ask, what should I do? I ask, what story is influencing what I want to do? Is there an image of someone that comes into my mind? I also have a big thing with feeling inadequate. And there's a big story around that I've worked through that I share a lot too. I go between the 2 stories, right? And so sometimes this person will pop into my head. So when she pops in, I go, oh, that's my story. Is this something I'd want to do? Or is that story of inadequacy popping into my mind to make me feel like I'm not going to be good enough to do it? That story pops in so that you know whether or not you get to decide in that moment, is this the story? Or is this me being ready to move past it and make a different decision? So for me in inadequacy, I might say, you know what, I'm going to try for this because that old story doesn't run my life anymore. It doesn't get that choice. If your story says, if I don't do it, no one else will, then you get to pause and say, is that the story running underneath? Is that true? Notice it. Don't argue with it. Don't judge it. Notice it. You get to question it if you want to. Question is curiosity. Then question 2, Once I've identified the story, I ask myself, is this story actually true today? Not was it ever true, because honestly, it was true before. It may have been. It may not have been, but there was definitely a season in your life where keeping everybody happy felt like the safest thing you could do. If that's the case, then it was true for that time. Maybe speaking up wasn't welcome. Maybe saying no had consequences. Maybe being the helper became part of your identity because it helped you belong. None of that makes you weak. It makes you human. But here's the question. Is that story still true for the woman you are today? Or have you simply been repeating it because it's familiar? Sometimes we confuse familiar with truth. They're not the same thing. Then comes the question that's become part of my everyday life. The question I hope that you'll carry with you after today. I ask myself, what would choosing me look like right now? If I was to choose me over any story that's coming up, anything else, what does that look like? Does it mean saying yes to this person? Does it mean trying for something that I feel like I'm inadequate for? Does it mean loving myself harder and letting somebody else own their own emotion? And it doesn't mean that choosing myself looks perfect. Perfection's not the goal. Sometimes choosing yourself means saying no. Sometimes it means saying yes to something you're afraid to pursue. Sometimes it means asking for help. Sometimes it means leaving work on time. Sometimes it simply means admitting I'm tired. Choosing yourself doesn't always change the outcome, but it changes who you're becoming. And it also helps you live life on your terms. That's powerful. So let's do a little practice together. Think about the situation you brought to mind at the very beginning of this conversation, the one where you wanted to say no. Picture it again. Let's walk through the 3 questions. First, what was the story running through your mind? Really listen to it, not the situation, but to the story. What was it asking you to believe? Now ask yourself, is that story actually true today? Or is it simply just familiar? And then finally, what would choosing yourself have looked like in that moment? Maybe your answer is still yes, but maybe you know it on a different level. Maybe your answer is yes, but I can only commit to a small amount of time. If they asked you to come and do something for all day, maybe you're like, hey, I can do from 1 to 3, but I can't do 8 hours. Maybe your answer isn't yes anymore. That's really not the point. The point is that this time the decision comes from you and your intuition, not autopilot. So I have women ask me all the time, how do I trust myself again? I think they expect some big life-changing answer. But honestly, I don't think self-trust is built in giant moments. It's built in hundreds of ordinary ones. Every time you pause before answering, every time you listen to that quiet voice instead of talking yourself out of it, every time your actions begin matching what your heart already knew, that's how trust grows. Not because you're fearless, not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you stop abandoning yourself one decision at a time, one conversation at a time. You begin proving to yourself that I will listen to you. And over time, your own voice becomes louder than the old story. Before we finish today, I want to ask you one more question. not about the past, about the future. I'd love for you to imagine yourself 6 months from now. Imagine you've practiced these three questions over and over again, not perfectly, just consistently. How would you like your relationships to be different? How would you like your calendar to be different? How would you like your stress level to be different? How would you like your conversations to change? And most importantly, who would you like to become if you stopped living from the old story and started living from the one you are intentionally choosing? So I don't think that's just a different life. I think that's the life you've been trying to create all along. Here's something I know for sure. When this episode ends, life isn't going to suddenly stop asking things of you. Someone will still need something. There will still be work to do. Your family will still have expectations. Your calendar will probably still be full. Nothing around you may change tomorrow, but something inside of you can, because now before you automatically answer, you have another option. You can pause, you can notice, you can choose. You can ask yourself, what story is running through my mind right now? Is the story actually true today? What would choosing myself look like in this moment? Not perfectly, not forever, just this moment. Because here's what I've discovered. Every single decision strengthens something. Every yes strengthens a story. Every no strengthens a story. Every time you ignore yourself, you strengthen the belief that your voice doesn't matter. But every time you stop, listen, and choose from truth instead of fear, you strengthen something else. You strengthen self-trust. And self-trust changes everything. It changes how you show up in your relationships. It changes how you parent, how you lead, work, rest, and love. Not because you've become someone different, but because your outside life finally begins matching what you've known deep inside all along. If today's conversation stirred something in you, if you found yourself recognizing pieces of your own story, I have a gift for you. I created a free assessment called What Story is Running Your Life? Because most of us can't rewrite a story until we know which ones we've been living. The assessment isn't about labeling you. It's not about telling you what's wrong with you. It's about helping you recognize the patterns you've been living for years without even realizing. It will help you uncover the hidden stories influencing your decisions, your relationships, your boundaries, your confidence, and your ability to trust yourself. Because once you can see the story, you finally have the power to decide whether you want to keep living it. Truly hope you'll take a few minutes to go through it. I think you'll discover things about yourself that you've never quite been able to put into words. And before I let you go, I want to leave you with this. You don't have to become louder to honor yourself. You don't have to become harder. You don't have to stop being kind. You don't have to stop being generous. You don't have to become someone your family doesn't recognize. You simply get to stop disappearing, because that's what self-abandonment is. It's disappearing from your own life, one small decision at a time. The beautiful thing is, self-trust is built exactly the same way. One small decision at a time, one honest conversation, one courageous boundary, one moment where your actions finally match what your heart already knew. And that's available to you right now. So the next time someone asks something of you, before you answer, pause. Ask yourself, what story is running through my mind? Am I choosing myself? And what would choosing myself look like? Because the life you're longing for, it doesn't begin the day everyone else changes. It begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself and start choosing yourself instead. Thank you for spending this time with me today.